As consumers grow increasingly conscious about where their food is coming from, the push is on for businesses to be socially responsible.
World Food Day 2023 comes during a global food crisis, with the world moving backwards on ending hunger and malnutrition.
So we need something that will give us that sense of direction and that opportunity for people to be able to drive things forward and make the changes that we know need to happen.
Food ethics is, at its heart, is the questions we should ask about our food, and we talk about there's some of the values and things that go underneath that. I'll give you an example in a minute. So people say, what makes a choice an ethical choice? And so, if you're someone that likes to eat chicken, for example, and the reason you eat it is because you like the taste, that's perfectly legitimate. That's not an ethical reason for it. Whereas if you choose to eat a certain type of chicken, or don't choose to eat chicken because of animal welfare reasons, because of health reasons, then that's getting into the world of food ethics. So what makes a choice an ethical choice is, we talk about three things. One is values. So think about fairness, well-being, justice, those kind of big hearty values. So those kind of getting into our food. Secondly, about contention. So like there's some kind of argument, or it's not straightforward. So whether we should eat or not, for example. And then thirdly, consequences. So there are impacts from what we eat. So there are all the food choices we make, and all the big food decisions that are made by government and others will all have impacts on animals, on the environment around us, on the workers, on people that are eating their food, on future generations, etc. So ethics is all about trying to think through. It's not about kind of, this is the right answer, that's the wrong answer, but it's trying to come together and ask that question, what should we do, all things considered? Which is a really tough question to ask, because you can never consider everything. But ultimately it's that, just trying to encourage people to think more in the round, rather than tunnel vision, and think a bit longer term and about impacts on others, rather than just sort of me. So that's why I've been involved in food ethics for a few years, and I find it fascinating. And I think the future will be largely, and has to be largely, agroecological and regenerative, and farming that works with nature, basically, rather than farming that much of the industrial farming that's still here at the moment, which is trying to bluntly control nature, and has very high inputs of pesticides, fertilizers, chemical inputs, and we know that can be, it's very expensive, first of all, but also it can be very damaging for the environment. So we need to shift away from that kind of high input model to something that is much more working in balance with nature, and so that looking after our soils better, regenerating our soils. I think there'll be more mixed farming in the future. In other words, so sort of arable farmer people eating more plant-based foods, but still a role for people to eat less and better meat and dairy. So that there can be a useful role for livestock on a kind of very practical level on farm to help with those regenerative systems that people are talking about. But at the same time, we need to recognize that animals are sentient beings, and that there'll be a whole swathe of people who, and I completely respect their views, will say there's no role for animals in farming in the future. And that would say I respect that point of view. I say my personal point of view is I think there will still be animals in the future, but I think there'll be far fewer than there are now. And then in terms of other types of farming, I think there will be we'll end up with a mix of different types of farming in the future, clearly. But I think there is a role for them, or there could be a role for things like vertical farming and some precision farming and things done well, but crucially not. I don't see that as the mainstay of the food system in the future. I see it as go back to farming with nature, perhaps smaller or farms that are trying to work with nature rather than fight against it, because we know that with the climate crisis, with biodiversity crisis, everything else, that we're never going to overcome that unless we're actually putting more into our land rather than take. So food citizenship, it's a mindset that we think people should adopt, and that's not, we're not trying to brainwash people. It stems from the work of people like John Alexander, who's a former chair of ours, who wrote a book called Citizens, and it's essentially this belief that actually if we think of ourselves differently and treat each other differently, then it opens up loads of opportunities for how we can actually positively shape the food system for the better. So to put some kind of meat on the bones to that, if we shift away from thinking of ourselves as consumers, so as consumers, we are often helpless, sort of passive, inverted commas, consumers, often at the end of a long chain, often very disconnected from where the food comes from. And the only way we can kind of participate in better food systems is if we've got a big enough wallet to be able to afford to buy organic food or whatever your proxy is for better food. Whereas actually, if we think of ourselves as food citizens or people, basically, we realize actually there are lots of different ways we can participate in the food system through how we vote, through whether we cook and eat together, all the kind of social mental health benefits of that, through our kind of connection with local farms and communities, through how our children eat, through if we're lucky enough to have pensions or investments, if they are invested in good food versus bad food. If I can paraphrase it simplistically like that. So the point is, food citizenship is a movement or way of thinking that takes us away from narrowly being trapped in a consumerist cage where we've got very little agency, opportunity to influence, and instead it's about just opening up the possibilities for us and for everyone to be able to participate on a bit more of a level footing, rather than it be in a consumerist world we're left with the kind of haves and the have-nots, or those that can participate and those that can't. So it's a way of bringing everyone into the discussion to be able to shape that food system. We talk about food system that's fair for people, planet, and animals, and that's what I think everyone wants ultimately. We've just done some work on dairy sector over the last 2 to 3 years, speaking to lots of people working in dairy, mostly dairy farmers and dairy workers, but also people across the sort of dairy value chain. So we didn't come into this process with a kind of predisposition that, or a view that this is what dairy should look like, and telling people what they should do. That's not our role. Our role was to kind of have the space, create the space for people to come together and explore, what are the barriers to fairer, more ethical dairy. So to your question, how can we improve the dairy system or the dairy sector? I mean, it's firstly it's a whole sector approach, which sounds a little bit cliche, but it's true. We need everyone in the dairy system to make shifts. This is not all about government policy. It's not all about big retailers. It's not all about us as members of the public. It's not all about farmers, but there's a role for us all to play. But one of there's too many things that need to change to do justice to now. But one of the key things for me is the key insights was that actually, if we want, there is appetite amongst dairy farmers in the UK to want to transition to dairy that is fairer for people, animals, and planet. It's just often dairy farmers and others are stuck on this treadmill, and that they have, they might have invested or be heavily indebted to the bank because they've spent lots of money on the latest kit to milking parlours and the like, and actually they're just stuck. There's genuinely very little they can do once they're in that position. So there's a desire, there's this sort of misconception that actually dairy farmers are somehow stuck in their ways. No one wants to change anything. But actually, what we think is actually, by what we've seen, is by looking after the farmers and giving them more headspace and more time, more resources to be able to actually get off the farm and go off to other farms and learn from them, do kind of peer-to-peer learning and learn from what other farmers are doing, then they'll be in a much better place to be able to actually make the changes that they'd like to do. They're just stuck. So many dairy farmers are physically stuck on farm. Some haven't had a break, haven't had a holiday for years. Haven't, and that, at one level that sounds, is that a big issue? But actually it is, because mental health in farming is a huge issue. And crucially, lots of dairy farmers still are being exploited and aren't being treated fairly, so that we need to sort out contracts, we need to sort out power imbalances in the chain, move away from loss leaders, and milk being classic thing which retailers use as a loss leader, often selling it below cost of production. So there's a whole bunch of things that need to change, a whole bunch of policy changes, a whole bunch of things, but critically it's about how can we support farmers to transition towards better dairy. And final thing I'll say on that is we should also recognise that the state of the sector is perilous, in that we've already seen 5% of dairy farmers in the last year or so leaving the sector, and the long-term trend is many dairy farmers getting out of dairy, which some people who aren't fans of dairy will be happy with, but the trouble is that we get left with this to sort of get big or get out, so that the dairy farmers are left tend to be the bigger ones, and if we're left with the bigger, if everything is about scale, then we end up with kind of only large industrial dairy, which can bring with it a number of ethical issues, like relating to welfare and environment. So we're in a difficult situation in dairy. It's a very complex sector, but by supporting farmers more, I think we can start to unlock some of the positivity that is there beneath all the day-to-day challenges of unfair pricing and unfair contracts. I think I find that innovation questions really fascinating, because often people think of innovation as kind of shiny new products and shiny new things that which somehow sort of naturally appeal to a lot of us. You think, that novelty, that new thing, but within the food system, what we too often have is innovation is focused on there's two parts. One is kind of novelty for novelty's sake, I would call it. So the kind of example I've used before is kind of bubblegum flavored cereal, or i.e. something very frivolous that is the next a different type of packaging that's got some sparkly packaging on the outside instead of see-through packaging, somehow seen as a kind of innovation and something that is new and desirable. I would argue that we don't need that kind of innovation, that all innovation should be towards how can we innovate towards something that is taking us closer to a sustainable food future. And also crucially, it's not, we do need some innovation in products, but more fundamentally, it's about we need an innovation in how we're delivering products to people. So people talk about circular systems, and how can we move away from sort of single-use plastic, or your bottle of milk, plastic bottle of milk, driving to the local shop, picking up that, bringing it home, drinking some of it, throwing some of it away, maybe recycling the bottle, maybe not. But that for me feels very illogical, and we need to innovate better systems for how we get food to people, food and drink to people, and crucially also at a kind of, without getting too systems geeky, we need to look at things at a kind of systems level. How can we innovate at a system level rather than just at a kind of individual product level? So if we think about within the farming space, you mentioned GMOs, and there's gene editing, there's a whole bunch of innovations, if you like, that are very contentious. There are, and again, the one of the problems I have is often it feels like some of these innovations are sort of developed, and then we're not starting with what's the problem, can we work back, what are some of the options to get there, of which GMOs or gene editing might maybe one of those options, but we're kind of starting with, here's some new technology, and then working back, what problem can this solve, or maybe it will help over there, maybe it won't, maybe there's some unintended consequences over there. So we need to start with what's the problem we're trying to solve, try and get collective, have some collective missions, if you like, for how can we bring lots of different people together to try and come up with ideas, solutions for tackling them, and then explore the different options, of which some of those techno-fix options might be on the table for some would say they shouldn't be there at all, but they could be. But fundamentally, lots of the solutions I would say are already out there, so we don't need to we don't necessarily need to spend all our time looking for shiny new things, sometimes that have the risk of harming the environment, harming people in the long run. Often there are lots of low tech and no tech solutions out there that just aren't spread around the country or spread around the world very well. And actually, we can learn a lot in a country like the UK, and learn a hell of a lot from many other countries which are farming much more in tune with nature than many of our farmers are. When we think about food policy and policy relating to food systems, it straight away gets really complicated, as you might imagine, because food affects food policy relating to food affects farming, or links to farming, it links to human health, it links to animal welfare, to environment, to social justice, to business, to beyond. So but what we have done is, one thing we did was bring a bunch of people together to consider what some of those principles might be, and the principles that came out from that discussion were, there were 5 of those. So one of those is learn from those affected. So learn from those affected. So clearly policies should be the people that are going to be worst affected, or the people affected, should be involved. There should be proper, meaningful public engagement and involvement, participation in that, which plays to discussions about food citizenship and involving people. So learn from those affected. Secondly, address root causes, not symptoms. Too many of our policies at the moment, not just in food but beyond, are kind of sticking plaster solutions or attempts at solutions that don't address the root causes. Thirdly, prioritizing public good over public interest. So again, we see this a lot, that lots of the research that's been done, the R&D, innovation, etc., and some of the policies relating to that. It's about working with industry, working with big business, and it often, not always, but often is about prioritizing kind of corporate and private interests, whereas we would argue it should be in the public good first and foremost. Fourthly, we talk about using a rights-based framework, making sure no one's left behind, and that fundamental rights like right to food are realised, fundamental human rights realised by UK citizens. And then lastly, cross-departmental and joined up. So be cross-departmental and joined up, recognising, as I said earlier, food is connected to everything from planning to education to housing to trade. And we need proper joined up approach. And it's interesting to learn from places like Scotland. Not perfect, but like they have a much better policy framework. Things like the Good Food Nation Act they brought in recently, which in principle at least is a great way of trying to join up lots of different parts of the policy landscape that relate, rather than at the moment certainly the UK government level of things are very, very siloed. You've got on the one hand people doing stuff that they think is better for health, and on the other hand doing something they think is better for business. On the other hand, they think something's better for the environment, and actually things aren't properly joined up. So they're just a few principles that was able to co-produce that we think would help make policy much fairer. We've got a really broad remit, so we're working on a huge bunch of issues, that, as I said, that relate to environment, social justice, human health, animal welfare. One of our I guess big projects over the last 3-4 years now is around food citizenship. So that hence website foodcitizenship.info is we'd encourage people to go there to understand what that means, to get case studies, examples of organizations that are trying to adopt that mindset, to kind of unpack that and think about what some of the tools and resources they can use to think about how you change mindset, how you change your framing. And at one level, some of that is about the words we use and the language, which with all the problems we're facing in the world, feels a bit, at one level, can feel a bit like a bit what value will this have for us to change some words? But actually, words are really powerful, and framing is really powerful. And say we talk about sound the consumer alarm. So one of the tools, one of the bits of advice from that resource is whenever you hear the word consumer, just let that ring an alarm bell and think, can we change that word? Can we change that framing? Can we think instead of people as people, all food citizens? And that just starts to unlock a whole bunch of thoughts and ideas and opportunities that you maybe haven't thought about before. So food citizenship is a big piece of work we've been doing, encourage people to look at. And we have work in a whole bunch of areas. We're looking to do some more work around right to food and what that really means, and how can we get under the skin of that, and which links into questions about food access. With many people struggling to be able to afford food, we need to look again at right to food and how we can make that happen. So just examples of some of the things we've done on top of big work we've done recently on dairy, etc. So whole swathe of things, but yeah, we'd love people to check out our website. So foodcitizenship.info and foodethicscouncil.org. We've got loads of stuff on there, and we'd love to engage with people.